Welcome to Twin Talk Politics. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics. Today, we are so honored to be joined by Senator Cardozo, representing the beautiful province of Ontario. He is a recipient of the 2023 DreamKeepers Citation for Outstanding Leadership Award, the 125th anniversary of the Confederation of Canada Medal, the King Charles III Coronation Medal, among countless other awards and distinctions. Senator Cardozo, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you, Jason and Jerry, for inviting me, and really appreciate having this opportunity to chat.
Cool. I guess as you probably know, we have a pretty cemented tradition on our podcast where the first question is always a 50-50 guessing challenge of who do you think is Jason and who do you think is Jerry, just based on our different colored backgrounds. And I want to preface this by saying that more than half of our guests actually get it wrong. So please feel no pressure at all.
No pressure.
There's no question at all. Jason is the one with the yellow background, and Jerry is the one with the blue background.
Wow, you were so confident on that. And yeah, that's right. I'm Jason with the one with the yellow background. Congratulations. Not a lot of people get that right.
There you go.
Great. Now that you know how to tell us apart, let's dive straight into the episode. Jerry and I are well aware of all the incredible work that you've done for Canada. But for the listeners at home who might not be as familiar, we were wondering if you could please introduce yourself and share how your journey into public office began.
I've had a pretty regular life. So a couple of things that will be of interest to you. I was born in Pakistan. My family comes from India and Pakistan, and we moved to Canada when I was 18. I finished high school in Toronto at Western Collegiate, and then went to York University. I did my, and I'll go into some of the detail because you're talking to young people and some of these things might be interested. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Sure, yeah. Feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, so I went to York and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I just took my father's guidance. He was the kind of business guy and he just thought I should work towards my MBA. So I took, sort of bachelor of business kind of courses, and really wasn't doing that well. So halfway through, I switched to political science, which meant I took an extra year to do my BA honors. Instead of 4 years, it took me five. But part of that is because I started in not knowing what I wanted to do and switched over. So I did take economics courses and stuff, which at that time I didn't find interesting. But once I got into political science, I liked that a lot more and did better and then graduated with my degree. Now, here's the funny thing. When I graduated, I didn't have a clue as to what I wanted to do. I don't mind admitting this, especially to young people, because I think oftentimes back then it wasn't so much the case, but I think now young people are very stressed about what they're going to do with their careers.
For sure.
And this is just me and my career saying, don't sweat it. Just do whatever you can in terms of education. It's an investment. It's a good investment and go with the flow. At the end of the day, you can't be that picky to get the job you really want. You may be able to, you may be not. So take what comes. And my career has been a series of jobs that led from one to another. But here I'm at what might say is the tail end of my career, or could be, and maybe I've got one more job after this. But I you could draw a line from when I started till now, but I never planned it this way. I never planned to be in the Senate at this age. So I just did a bunch of different things that were interesting, that paid the bills, that were, it took me from one thing to another that was interesting and came through. Now, having said that, I've a lot of my contemporaries are retired. So I just turned 70 a couple of weeks ago. So my contemporaries who went to university together, most of them have retired. And we had a conference call, a Zoom call a few weeks back, and it was really interesting. Half of us knew what we wanted to do, and some of those people really did what they wanted to do all through their career, and the other half went and did all sorts of different things. In my first year, my roommate wanted to be a United Church minister, which is what his dad had done. He is now retired, but he did exactly what he planned to do from day one.
Wow.
And I marvel at that because he knew what he wanted to do from the first day he was in university in first year. He did that, and he went to the required college to teach to become a minister,
Mhm.
and he was a minister all his career. Whereas I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to university. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I came out of university, and my career has ended up being a series of things around government policy, either in government or outside government, but always dealing with improving government policy. So the point I want to make to young people is don't sweat. Do get the education or training of any kind. Don't sweat about what you're going to get. It's all a good investment because down the road, that kind of stuff will come in useful.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story. Our second question comes in two parts. So first, we're wondering, what do you think are the most pressing problems concerning youth in Canada as a whole right now? And secondly, what do you think are the most paramount issues for youth in Ontario?
My sense of it, and what I'm focusing on, is youth employment. I am very concerned about the level of youth unemployment in Canada. So the unemployment rate for Canadians overall is about 6%, which is a little bit high, but or maybe 6.5. The unemployment rate for youth is double that, so 12, 13% and more, and that is very troubling. So I certainly feel that for people like me who are in the Senate, in Parliament, we need to focus on that issue and try to, um, push governments, push business, push employers to do more in terms of hiring young people, because it's so many things. It's getting a job, getting a first job, earning some money. But what studies have found is that young people who have not worked in the first few years of their working life, for years after, they're behind the eight ball. And
Hmm.
especially these days, with technology advancing so fast, if you don't, if you're not in the working world, you're not able to keep up with technology. So you can do it yourself to some extent, but to a large extent, but you really need to be in the work world to keep up with technology and to keep up with the different styles of work. So I'm very concerned about the high rate of unemployment. I've raised it a few times in the Senate. I organized a roundtable on this matter to bring together a number of organizations, governments, young people who work on this issue. But that to me is the biggest problem that I think I can be involved in from the federal government point of view.
For sure. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I guess connected to unemployment as well, another major concern for young Canadians right now is our relationship with our neighbors to the south. Over the past year, that relationship economically has been significantly strained, with tariffs reaching as high as 50% in sectors like steel, and in the manufacturing sector alone, 51,800 Canadians' jobs have been lost just over the span of the past 12 months. And we know that you've been hosting frequent Canada US chats with diplomats, industry leaders, and experts, including Mr. Aaron O'Toole, Mr. Daniel Tish. I think this feels especially timely given Prime Minister Carney's recent announcement of a new advisory committee on Canada-US economic relations. So our question here is, from your conversations with the formal review of CUSMA approaching rapidly this July and Canada increasingly looking to diversify its trading relationships, how do you assess the federal government's position heading into these negotiations? Are we still negotiating from a position of trying to preserve the status quo, or is Canada now much more prepared to, reshape the broader North American trade framework?
I would say the deadline of CUSMA means nothing.
Okay.
Deadlines mean nothing to Donald Trump. It'll happen when it happens. Happen usually when he wants. Um, so if you notice, like with Iran, he extended the deadline or whatever deadline he had. He had no choice in that matter. But for the most part, in other places, he does control things. So in negotiations with Canada, he is in the top spot, not us. So that means that. But I think what we have in our side is a very smart negotiator in government too. In Mr. Carney, you have somebody who is very thoughtful, and has the ability to think several steps ahead. So, in some ways, they both got the same strengths, Trump and Carney. Carney is a lot more of a cooler head, but the but I think what the Carney uh, approach will be is to think several steps ahead. And so one of the things, yeah, people are going on about Mexico's further down the road. We're not. Well, the one of the points Mr. Carney's made quite often is that we don't want a bad deal just for the sake of having a deal, and that's
For
really
sure.
important. So we've got the free trade. If we don't make a deal by July the 1st, the free trade deal carries on.
Yeah.
It's not that all the trade comes to an end. So a lot of things that are tariff free carry on. And so we'll have, I mean, I don't think we'll have a deal, but I definitely think we won't have one by July 1st. I don't think we'll have one by the end of the year. But I'm not terribly troubled about that, in terms of getting a deal. I am troubled about it because the effect it has on the economy.
Mhm.
Because it keeps, when things are not sure, it leaves us in not a good economic perspective, but also it makes investors nervous, and so they're not investing, they're not creating jobs. So there's serious downside to that. But um, we're not going to be not having a deal. I think it'll just take longer.
Thank you so much for your
Excuse me.
response. And turning to another area of your expertise, we know you spent your entire career from your time as Commissioner of Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission to your Senate inquiries onto the future of Canadian news media, fighting to defend CBC Radio Canada and arguing that it is essential for Canadian identity. Sadly, it is still extremely underfunded, with numbers showing Canada spends just $33 per capita on its public broadcaster, which is actually less than half of the international average of $78. And while it has been encouraging to see the recent 150 million in new funding, as you pointed out, this also raises a deeper tension, since independent media ideally should not rely on sustained government support. At the same time, as you've also noted again, it is abundantly clear that if the subsidies were cut today, you risk losing much of almost all of that public media infrastructure altogether. So we are wondering if you could explain why you believe CBC remains essential today, and how can we build a long-term funding model that preserves both independence and editorial integrity without creating unsustainable reliance on governmental support.
Wow, you guys have really done a lot of homework on reading the stuff I've been doing and saying. I'm flattered. Thank you very much. I hope you have plenty of time for your schoolwork while you're doing all the prep for these interviews. The problem with media is the problem that media has faced over the past decade was with the onset of the internet. It destroyed their funding model. So private sector media was all based on advertising. And what happened with the internet is once that got going, all the advertising left traditional media and moved to online media. Not even online media, more social media. So news media does not attract much advertising. And that's part of it is that the advertising left. The other part is that people's process and how they consume news and how they demand news has changed. Sadly, by and large, people's interest in news has decreased a lot.
Yeah.
They are satisfied with smaller amounts of news and easily misled by misinformation and disinformation.
Correct.
And so we're in this odd situation um, where we've got more information available to the public than ever before because of the internet, but people are, and I would say the word perhaps, it would seem to me that they're perhaps less informed than they were when there was less media, less information around. It's because there's too much information. So we don't consume as much information as we do, and we're much more satisfied with a much more superficial amount of information. So, you know, a tweet on X is sort of the ultimate metaphor for something. And in whatever small number of characters you're allowed to do on Google, that's what a large number of people are satisfied with. Um, Certainly, an older age demographic, sort of baby boomers and older, want more news. And yes, there's a large number of younger people who do, but I would suggest it's people with a in terms of younger people, it's people with a higher level of education, and mostly, but not always. And then just everybody who doesn't have, who's not in university or not with a very high level of education are satisfied with a small amount of news. Um, and perhaps we want to know about a lot more things on the one hand, but on the other hand, we tend to go to the news sites that reflect our viewpoints. So
Right.
we're living much more in silos, and we're training. Well, the what algorithms do is they give you the news you're interested in. Whereas in the newspaper, you open the big newspaper and you read the articles that were of interest to you, but staring you in the face were all the other articles that were not of interest to you, but you might look at. Now you're just getting this narrow view of what the algorithm thinks you want more of, and you just kept getting that information, and not only the topic but also the perspective. So if you're right wing or if you're left wing, it'll just give you the right wing or the left wing perspective on the economy or on unemployment or on basic income or unemployment or whatever. So we're just becoming more and more bifurcated or fragmented, and we're living our lives in more narrow silos, which has a serious problem for democracy, where we care less about each other, care less about the issues we don't know about. And that is why things like CBC and new forms of news media are necessary. So CBC is a state funded, but it's a public broadcaster as opposed to a state broadcaster. The state broadcaster is one where the state determines what is said on the news, whereas a public broadcaster is funded by the state, but the broadcaster figures out what to say, and the content is not controlled by the government. So CBC was created some 75 years ago because of the concern that American media was having too much impact on Canada. Um, Today, that need is more urgent and more serious and more dangerous, if I can use that word,
For sure.
than it was 75 years ago. Because a lot of what we're reading is, in fact, American news coming on American channels. All the major social media networks are based in the US. We've got to think about digital sovereignty, which is how do we have more Canadian owned platforms and websites. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff to do. But basically, to come back to your question, sorry, I've gone
No
on a
worries.
couple of
No
tangents.
worries.
Um, but so I talked about CBC. The rest of the media, most of it, whether it's online media or traditional media, most of it gets funding from the government. If there had been a change in government, the conservative position was to stop all that funding. I don't disagree with their viewpoint, which is that government should not fund media. I think that's a sound principle, except when that news media has no other source of funding,
Right.
then if the government doesn't fund it, it will die.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That seriously affects our ability to know what's happening. It seriously affects our democracy. And therefore, what we need, and I'm just completing a report which I'll put out next week, talking about options for how we support media. So we've got to do more in terms of of having an arm's length agency that will fund media so that it's not coming out of government departments and that ministers of the government have no say as to who gets money and who doesn't.
Right.
I think this ties in really perfectly with the next question, which is continuing on the topic of media integrity and the future of information in our digital age. We know you warned on the Senate floor that misinformation, disinformation, and the misuse of AI by bad actors are growing, and in your words, by leaps and bounds. And the data certainly backs it up. So During the 2025 federal election alone, AI generated fake news impersonating CBC and CTV spread widely across all social media platforms, with about 1 in 4 Canadians reporting exposure to fabricated stories, significantly driving up polarization, with now 55% of the Canadian public stating that they think polarization is getting worse, and 44% of young Canadians now see polarization as a direct threat to national stability. As we just talked about a little bit, local news are collapsing, platforms like Meta banning Canadian news, and AI accelerating that spread. Well, our question is, what concrete actions could Canada take to combat the misinformation and the disinformation that is currently dividing our country?
Geez, I'd like to ask you that question more than me. I think people talk about the need to have more media education of people. That's something that could happen, that should happen through the system, starting with fairly young kids in elementary school and high
For sure.
school. But it's becoming harder and harder. Like 6 months ago, people would say that there were artificial intelligence videos that were being put up where politicians the same thing, and they'd say, "There's no problem. You can tell the difference in quality. The quality is poor if it's AI. The quality is good if it's regular." Well, they sorted that out in a few months.
Yeah.
So the quality of disinformation videos are as good as the quality of accurate videos. So we can't rely on quality, and even when you can, sometimes in a specific area, um, it used to be things like lighting or quality of or accent, so you could tell if it was a kind of Russian accent or something, that it was coming from Russia. But they've dealt with all that. Either they've got people with, say, North American or European accents, or they've got um, or there is in fact AI that's able to produce a mainstream American accent or a mainstream Canadian accent. So as as the as the quality of AI and the ability to manipulate it negatively grows, it just becomes harder and harder. I think one of the things goes back to the point we discussed earlier, which is at least ensuring that there are some credible sources of information, such as CBC, Edge Canada, and all the other traditional media, as well as a growing number of online media.
Mhm.
Um, but to give you an example, there was at the end of the leaders' debate in the last election, what would always happen, the five leaders would get together and have a debate, and they'd each come out and they'd talk to the media. Well, what happened in the last election is you had a lot of people from, sort of rage, quote unquote, media there, which were not considered real news media. And what they did is they sort of took over the press conference and were basically, shouting very angry positions at them and pretending to be media. So it was the first time we had a real clash of traditional media who might ask tough questions, but always did it respectfully and in a fairly non-biased way, and other people who had basically infiltrated the media system, the press conference, and were being very partisan and attack mode in their questions. And if you look at that, we can quibble about why those other people were there or not. That's sort of one question. But if you look at that, that's sort of maybe that's the future of press conferences for politicians and for researchers and anybody else who gives a press conference. So I certainly don't have the ideas. I just, I agree with you. It's a big problem, and I think we have to be very concerned about it. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and it's never going to get better. It's not one of those things that's it's going to be worse before it gets better. I think it's just always going to be worse. But the whole media, the whole information landscape is changing so drastically that we really don't have a sense of it. And then there's a whole thing of just, what is AI going to be able to do on its own?
Right.
Right now, we're still talking about it where we humans sort of ask it questions that tell it what to do. What happens when it starts doing its own thing?
Right. For sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. I think the point that you raised at the beginning of like a media training is definitely something that institutions, especially schooling systems, should definitely look a lot more into. So thank you for that. Our next question is, we know that even before joining the Senate, you were already heavily involved with politics and public policy, serving as the president and co-founder of the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy. And for viewers at home who may not be familiar, it's one of Canada's leading dynamic think tanks that engages Canadians in active dialogue about a better future for Canada. Our question here is, what motivated you to create that? And looking back, do you think there's any, I guess, lessons or skill sets from that experience that have translated especially well into your work in the Senate?
I think, well, well, I have about two or three different thoughts on that. One is I think there's a really useful role for think tanks. So what's a think tank? It's a group of people who get together who have some kind of common approach to something, and they decide to do more research and networking and talking about whatever issues they want to talk about. So the Pearson Center is an organization that deals with domestic policy largely, sometimes foreign policy, named after Lester B. Pearson, who really was the prime minister who led Canada into the modern era in terms of a lot of policy issues. Um, so it was a matter of bringing people together and having conversations. The thinking was always to make sure we had a diversity of views brought forward. The United States has a much more developed form of think tanks. There are more sources of income there because they have large foundations, family foundations. We don't have as much of a charitable sector here, or at least a foundation sector who could fund think tanks. We need to do that more. Um, and it's sorry, it's just an ability to bring people together and think out loud about issues without being part of a government or without being part of a political party. One of the things that it taught me, which is very useful in the Senate, is to always think broadly about issues. So on we have about 20 committees in the Senate that address various issues,
Yeah.
such as the finance or defense or agriculture. And every time we have a bill that comes to the Senate that's going to become law, um, that has a particular issue, it'll go to that committee. I find that when we're inviting people, my approach is always much more, um, let's get the breadth of views forward, whereas sometimes
Mm.
people who've come from a particular sector can suggest somebody from their sector, such as, say, a business group in Alberta or a social group in Toronto. My approach is always automatically, whatever the issue is, what's the breadth of opinions that are out there, and how can we make sure we hear from everybody as opposed to just the people I know or agree with? And I think that the think tank world, if if it's done well, so it trains you to think broadly, you think about the diversity of opinions, as even though you might be focused on one set of areas, you always want to be thinking about other areas and hearing from other people.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. We also know that you're a huge, huge proponent and advocate for the arts, particularly through your role as the chair of the Arts and Heritage Advisory Working Group, which I'm sure that the senator will explain far, far better than me. But it focuses on essentially showcasing and preserving the arts and heritage of the current Senate building and obviously future plans for the return to Senate block. First and foremost, thank you so much for this work. And I think that something that really stuck with us in one of your past speeches is you mentioned how the Senate holds just a world-class collection of 6,000 works of art that directly reflects, Canada's dynamic political journey. And in fact, we had the chance to, and the great honor to visit the Senate last winter. And I remember being particularly struck by the works from Indigenous communities, such as the Big Raven panel, and also heard from other individuals who also really appreciated the display of Kabuto to honor Asian Heritage Month last spring. So our question here is, what does the process look like for deciding which works are displayed and the center block renovations approach completion, I guess, in the next couple of years? What is your vision for how heritage pieces will be displayed in the Senate and in the new Parliament Welcome Center?
Thanks for that. I mean, it's interesting is you explained the role of our working group very well. The interesting thing is we're not an arts institution, right? We're a democratic political institution. But one of the things that has always been there is the development of arts to some extent. So
Sure.
there are different kinds of arts we have. One is paintings of each speaker. So they're very high quality paintings of every speaker since the beginning
Right.
of Confederation, and those pictures are all over the building. We have paintings of all the kings and queens of England who were kings and queens of Canada, because Canada still is a realm of the king. And then a senator by the name of Serge Royal put together a number of paintings of French kings who were kings during the time that France controlled Canada, and Canada was known as New France. That was about a period of about 300 years. So that's sort of what we've had. What we're also trying to do now is to diversify our collection, so ensure there's more indigenous art in around the building, more art from other people from other backgrounds, and it's really fun to do that, to be able to bring different kinds of art to the Senate. People who come to see the Senate do look around, they look at the walls and they think,
Yeah.
wow, this is this is relevant to what we're doing. So we have a couple of committee rooms, for example, one that has the where the Transport and Communications Committee meets, and we've got a series of art there which reflects transportation. So it's like a CN train. There's another painting of a snowplow, by different aspects of transportation. The other thing we did recently was have four artists sketch the visit of King Charles to
Oh,
the
wow.
Wow.
Senate last year when he came to do the speech from the
Yeah,
throne.
yeah.
So sketching is an old form of art which is still used in courts. For example, in court you'll see that they never do a photograph of the witnesses or the victim or whatever. They have sketches. So we whereas in Parliament we now do photography, but for that occasion we had four well-known and very expert sketch artists sketch his going through the building, and that's one of the new installations we have. And then we're thinking about as you said, the return to the Senate block. So we're in
Yeah.
this temporary building for 15 years, which used to be the railway station.
Yeah.
We're going back to the Senate block in about 2033. And what we're doing is preparing for that as to how that's going to be, can show some of the diversity of all the lives of Canadians.
For
So
sure.
you'll have to come back, and I'll be happy to give you a tour when we're back in the Senate block, or even anytime in the current building, our temporary building.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much for that offer. Again, thank you as well for that insight. And I'm sure that will not be the last time we talk about art in this conversation. All right, for the last part of the interview, we wanted to shift gears and talk a little bit more about youth. Unfortunately, in recent years, youth engagement in politics has been on a significant decline, evidenced by low youth voter turnout rates across the country and younger voices remaining underrepresented in government. So our question is, in your opinion, how can youth become more engaged within the political sphere and play a much more active role in our democracy today?
Yeah, can I ask you both first a question? What is your view about lowering the voting age to 16?
Yeah,
We're actually part of like the national group supporting it. Yeah, Jason, I actually wanted to thank you so much for voting in support of Bill S222. It really meant a lot for us. And we're so grateful for your vote. In the end, although we fell short, it was just really great seeing actually how much support we had in the Senate because we just lost by, a couple of votes. So,
It was three votes, yeah, it was 36 to
yeah,
33, and then
yeah,
a number of people abstained. And it was unfortunate we didn't, because that was a vote just to send it to committee.
yeah.
So
yeah,
it's unfortunate it didn't even get to committee where it would have had more discussion. But I should tell you, I have talked to a number of young people who also are not in favor of it. People who are 16 and 17 and feel that they're not. they feel they're not equipped to know enough to vote. I wasn't 100% in favor of it. I'm not necessarily against it. I haven't really decided because I'm listening to a lot of people with
Right.
both viewpoints. What I was in favor of was definitely, I think it deserved to have a proper discussion and
For
deserved to
sure.
have um, uh, uh, a discussion by a committee
Yeah.
and the ability for young people to come forward. And then, I was very open-minded about the issue. But it was unfortunate that some people felt there are various views. Some people just don't think young people are ready to vote on. The other view was that when it comes to democracy stuff, voting in elections, that we in the Senate, because we're not elected, shouldn't be the ones starting off a
Yeah.
bill. That it should always start in the elected House of Commons. I see that point of view. I don't agree with it because whether it starts in the House or the Senate, our job is still to review
For sure.
and the bill.
Yeah.
So whether we do sober second thought or sober first thought, we would still need to be examining the issue. But yeah, that's the way that cookie crumbled, and I don't see any another one coming up for the next while. But other things young people can do, I think, is certainly get involved. And the thing about political involvement, it's not only political parties.
Hmm.
It's movements, it's associations, it's demonstrations, it can be your neighborhood watch, it can be a cancer society. Everything you do is in a sense involvement. So I recently organized Cancer Awareness Day in the Senate.
Yeah, I
Wow.
saw that.
What we did was we had the board of the Canadian Cancer Society come in, and all of us wore yellow daffodils
Yeah.
for the day. So it was a nice way for us, and we took a picture all together, and then everyone was in the chamber. So it was a nice way of, for one day, raising the flag of cancer awareness. But those are things that people can be involved in. It doesn't have to be political.
Right.
Um, our society works because there are a series of different kinds of organizations out there. Everything from very local to national to international. Maybe you want to be involved in an organization that deals with the environment in South America, for example, or in the rainforest, or something that's happening in Africa. So there's just a number of ways people can get involved. And I wouldn't take too much disappointment from the issue of the vote. I think if I were to say in the end, even if we did have the hearings, I don't think Canada is ready to go that route. So my point is, yeah, go ahead and keep pushing it. Maybe one day we'll be there, but don't get disappointed and don't think the world is against 16 and 17-year-olds or against young people because they didn't support this particular idea. There's a ton of different ways that you can be involved and that you should be involved and must be involved because guess what? As I said, I'm 70. I'm not going to be around that much longer. You are. So you've got to, it's your world and your life. So you've got to get out there and get involved.
Thank you so much for that response, and thank you for such thoughtful responses to all of our questions today. It's time for the final question, and we always leave the fun question to the very end. And this question will most likely be the hardest question of them all. So we know you're a Renaissance man, and beyond politics, you're also an accomplished artist, having studied at the Ottawa School of Art, with your work featured in exhibitions like the Gleb Art Tour and displayed internationally from the United States to England to Ecuador. And after seeing some of your pieces online, we were genuinely struck by how incredible they were. We know you have a passion for specifically painting abstract acrylic landscapes of both iconic and lesser known scenes across Canada, from British Columbia to Nunavut to Newfoundland. So we want to ask, which landscape has been your favorite to paint? Scenery, mountains, or waterscapes?
Um, I would say, I think without doubt, the Mount Rundle, which is a mountain in near Banff.
Mhm.
It is a very majestic mountain. It is, and the way the mountain was created millions of years ago is when two plates came together, and then one got pushed up. So what you've got is this mountain that sort of goes up like this on one end and then is jagged down this side. And it's just a very majestic, incredible mountain. I've tried climbing it twice.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've only got up halfway. And one time was a scramble. Do you know what a scramble is?
No.
No.
The scramble is what the Parks Canada doesn't advise.
Oh.
You're like you're not climbing. You're scrambling up the whole time. So you're kind of crawling up the mountain. And it's basically gravel all the way. So as you're climbing up, your feet keep sliding down.
Flipping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so you're climbing a fairly steep incline, but it's very exhilarating and amazing to climb up and even more dangerous to come down. But it's a very beautiful mountain, and it's uh, yeah, Lake Louise is also very nice to
Mhm.
paint. But the odd thing is, I've sold a fair amount of my art. I'm not selling now while I'm a senator, but I did sell before. What I find sad is that in this part of the country, in Ontario, people aren't as interested in art about mountains as they are where the mountains are.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think people tend to buy art that is from their area, or
Mhm.
maybe if they visit another area, if they go to BC, they might go to Banff, they'll buy a mountain painting there, but they won't buy a mountain painting in Ottawa. Understandably, you go to the East Coast to buy a painting about the East Coast, but you wouldn't buy that same painting in Ottawa. So it's like a souvenir.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. And for the listener at home, as we said, please go check out the senator's work. They're online and they're phenomenal. All right. That concludes our interview today. Again, Jen and I would like to extend such a big thank you to Senator Cardozo and his phenomenal team for this amazing opportunity and taking the time out of his extremely busy schedule to come here and actually meet with us. From the bottom of our hearts, we truly, truly appreciate it. For all the listeners at home, if you guys wish to see more interviews like this, be sure to tune into future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you very much.